So this came up this morning, and it came out of the Telegraph. And then, I saw it pop up on Twitter. And the Telegraph seems to be the only media source covering it for now. I expect we're going to see and hear a lot of other sources pick this up over time because it's quite salacious what is being presented. In a nutshell, the claim is that when the BBC was presenting information or footage of what Trump had to say January 6, 2021, they manipulated, selectively edited what was said and presented it in a manner that made it appear that Trump was inciting violence or a call to action, a call to violent action, inciting violence, in a way that was not reflected by the actual speech given. And it came about because there was an internal whistleblower that came forward, and the Panorama program, and so it wasn't just on. Oh, sorry, I'll start that again. The specific time that it was doctored for was when it was covered in a Panorama program just before the 2024 election. Okay, that context is missing up there, but basically it's misleading. It can be seen as an attempt to mislead leading into the 2024 election, and also gives people more arguments to the whole, well, they're not ideologically pure. They're leaning one way or another and misrepresenting their position as a nominally neutral arbiter. I mean, the BBC and the ABC, nationally funded broadcasters, you think they have a remit to be politically neutral in what they cover and how they cover it. So the whistleblower alleges that they'd completely misled viewers, that BBC had, by showing the president telling supporters he was going to walk to the Capitol with them to fight like hell, when in fact he said he would walk with them to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. And this also comes into the tweets and other social media that Trump had been putting out that day as well, because one of the key tweets that he'd put out was very rapidly suppressed by the disinformation team. I mean, they don't see themselves as that, but the disinformation team within Twitter at the time. And so you had this very, very clear call to peaceful, to go home in peace, that was suppressed and not given the reach that it probably should have. Instead, the rhetoric that people could shape into calls to violence was allowed to stand, but the direction or the request to go home in peace was immediately suppressed. And so people say, well, no, Trump was inciting this. And it's like, well, hang on. You could make a very clear argument that there was a misleading manipulation of what was said on the day by social media and media organizations, because this final set of statements were taken away from the context. And then, as you see here, the allegation that, look, it seems fine to chop up and stitch together the speeches or information whatever way they say fit, see fit. Now, this is a problem on many levels, but the US 60 Minutes program had basically to pay out because they'd misrepresented, I think it was Kamala Harris's interview, and the allegation being that it was a dishonest representation of what had taken place. Well, 60 Minutes in the US isn't on the same level of regard as a impartial arbiter as, say, the BBC. And now we've got the BBC doing this. It's like, well, I mean, some people never trusted the BBC since Jimmy Savile or before, but it's to be caught so flagrantly and blatantly manipulating what is then presented as truth. It brings into question whether they can be trusted for anything. Now, that's not just the Gell-Mann amnesia effect, but a more broader understanding of their reputation, of their trust, reliability. Once bitten, twice shy. So, yeah, anyway. So, the whistleblower comes out of the BBC's Standards Committee. Well, that's pretty interesting. And he has a circulating government departments. I don't think that the current UK government necessarily has an issue. I mean, they probably would have been quite happy ignoring the whistleblower's report and not doing nothing about it, except now it's sort of popped out and become public. And so therefore people are going to be forced to take actions or to acknowledge it. Yeah, so the dossier says the program made the US president say things he never actually said by splicing together footage from the start of his speech with something he said nearly an hour later. Yeah, that's kind of misrepresenting. I mean, it's not cutting out ums, ahs, ers, and blank spaces, okay, kind of makes sense. Provided the blank spaces or other elements aren't being used for effect. I mean, sometimes saying nothing in a speech is being used to drive home a message or drive home a point, but generally cutting that stuff out just makes it more expeditious to listen to. And so the Corporation's Own Standards watchdog had raised complaints and that had been ignored and dismissed. Now, I mean, the ABC here in Australia has not quite a similar thing. It used to have a program, I don't know if it still has, called Media Watch, that used to do not a similar sort of thing. I mean, they had their own internal standards as well, I guess. I mean, that's what editors are supposed to be for in some respects. But Media Watch used to hold the feet of the media to the fire on misleading claims or misrepresentations like this. If it was caught publicly, you'd see it. It was like 9:15 on Monday night after Four Corners. You'd see they'd come on for 15 minutes, talk about errors in like egregious errors. Not just a case of, oh, we made a mistake and we fixed it, but more attempts to mislead, misrepresent, than just straight up errors. And I don't think it runs anymore. But anyway, yep. So obviously now that's being picked up, and well, you're certainly hearing from mouthpieces on the right. Certainly picked up and ran with it first. Now I don't think the Telegraph is considered right-leaning. Centre-left, maybe. I always thought they were left side of politics. So to have this pop up, I mean, it's more a slam on the BBC. It just so happens Trump was the hammer used to drive home that particular nail. And so they're going to have more information. coming out, which is going to expand the complaint to cover bias in reporting on Gaza, that censorship of, I didn't know there was coverage of a transgender debate. Well, J.K. Rowling had launched into them. That doesn't seem odd. So yeah, it raises questions about the culture at the BBC, impartiality. Well, that doesn't exist right now. And that they're turning blind eyes to the evidence of bias. Well, we just spent the initial start of the stream today talking about bias by the Australian equivalent of the BBC. Now, obviously, Conservatives will demand an immediate investigation. Yep, makes sense. They're the opposition in the UK at the moment. Yeah, so it is concerning revelations that could seriously undermine the brand and reputation of the BBC. It's a bit like how the Lancet, the medical journal, the Lancet, should have taken a reputation hit after Dr. Wakefield it led to the first wave of anti-vaccination / vaccination linked to autism issues many years back. But they kept presenting themselves as, no, we're a reputable voice in medical science, despite having to retract papers and everything else. The other part too is being publicly funded, there is an expectation that they're going to be impartial. Yeah. Now, I mean, if this was one of the mass media organisations down on Fleet Street, for example, people would be like, well, okay, it's publicly owned or privately owned, sorry. They're going to carry whatever news they feel fit. As a national broadcaster, the obligations on you are a little bit different. So yeah, there can be no justification for this sort of deliberate manipulation and spreading of misinformation. People laughed at Trump when he said, oh, it's fake news. And it's like, that they're reporting alternate facts. And people think, oh, no, they're trustworthy. Well, we're just seeing reality finally catch up to say, oh yeah, by the way. So it's not the first time bias, yeah, okay, not overly concerned about the bias as such. Just sort of means you trust what they have to say on some issues less, which I guess comes back to impartiality and trust. So yeah, license fee payers. So yeah, the most damaging disclosure at the moment is to do with Trump at the moment. I dare say some other people are going to be more concerned about the Gaza stuff when it comes out. And the way it was edited created the impression that Trump supporters had taken up the call to arms when the footage was before the speech had even taken place. So, yeah, it's a distortion of the day's events. And this comes back to, I guess, what Trump had been saying all along about the January 6th committee and all the other bits and pieces, that there had been a gross misrepresentation, not only of events of the day, that what had been presented as fact wasn't really the case. And even when the issue was raised, and now you get into what's more concerning from an organizational perspective. You can say that, okay, we made a mistake in how that was edited. No one told us about it. We apologize. We'll fix it up. That's one thing. To have it be a case of, oh, we've made a mistake. We were told about it at the time before we published it, but we disregarded and went ahead anyway. That is vastly different. One is an error. Well, I see, my worldview is that the errors come in three forms. You have an error of an error of ignorance. you don't know how to do a task, or you don't know that such and such a task exists, or that it should be carried out. Okay, you are ignorant of the fact or the correct way to do something. All right, you were tempted, but you did it the wrong way because you didn't know any better. You were ignorant. Now, I'm not saying that it's a negative thing. It's just because you lack the knowledge that in that way. Now, it might be you're willfully ignorant. That comes into the third error type. The second one is incompetence. Your initial error was due to ignorance. You have then been trained and tested and found capable of doing the task correctly or providing the right information. Yet you make mistakes, or you've made a further error and have misrepresented the information. Now, that then comes down to a question of the appropriateness of the training, whether you should have been signed off as capable, but it comes down to it. Basically, it is an error of incompetence, as in, well, I tried to do the right thing, I just didn't do it right. I wasn't good enough, or I didn't do the task properly. Could be by virtue of not paying attention, a whole bunch of underlying reasons, but fundamentally it's because of incompetence. It's not a case of I didn't know. That's the ignorance. You've now been shown how to do it properly and presumably qualified in the art. It is therefore an incompetence, an error of incompetence. So they're the sort of thing that happens from time to time. The third error type, where you now introduce intent, is one of negligence, where not only have you been told about the correct way of doing things, you've been shown, so that obviates ignorance, you've been shown and found to be capable, therefore your incompetence argument takes a back seat. Continued error making in that from then on then starts raising a question of intent. If you're fully capable of doing the task and people know you can do it and you've demonstrated your skill set and everything like that, persistent error making or ongoing errors then raises the question of, is there an intent behind what you're doing to screw up? Are you being willfully ignorant? Are you introducing a willful component to your errors, i.e. negligence? Come back here and apply that concept here. Were managers unaware that they were treading on thin ice? No, that wasn't a case of ignorance. They'd been told. So in this case, is it a matter of retraining, or them not being skilled or unable to or unaware of what they need to do to present information more effectively, by virtue of the fact that these reporters and directors and stuff are in the positions they are at the BBC? You would assume a certain degree of competence. You're not necessarily talking about something being purely done by people fresh out of school or training or anything like that, or working in an under-resourced, understaffed environment. Well, maybe the BBC is, but you're talking about somewhere where you would expect a degree of competency at that level. You're not going to be put on a flagship program if you don't know what you're doing. So the fact they were told about it, the fact that they're involved with such a flagship program, implies that they have a degree of competency. The desire to persist in the error-making condition, or to persist in pushing the misrepresented information, implies intent, that they intended for this to happen. Therefore, it's a degree of negligence. Now, obviously, negligence can be a loaded term and attract, I guess, a legal interpretation. But they're, at this point, by refusing to accept that there'd been a breach of standards, it may potentially be a difference of opinion on fact as to what the fact is, but the fact that they've re-stitched together out of context statements to then present it as if it's contextual, well, that's not just a difference of opinion on factual elements, that's misrepresentation. And to refuse to accept that that's inappropriate, at this level, yeah, there's intent, clear intent behind it. So yeah, very, very dangerous precedent set by Panorama. So they'd even sent it to the BBC chairman and got no reply. It comes back to the concept of you set the standard, you walk past. Now, if it's demonstrated that the BBC chairman was aware of the issues raised in the whistleblowing report, but chose to ignore them, right, the BBC chairman can no longer claim that he or she, I think that's a he, was unaware, so was ignorant of what was going on. He's been told about it. You're the BBC chairman. You expect there to be a degree of competency, so it's not going to be a case of, they don't know what to do. They're the ones responsible for setting the path of the entire system. So, therefore, inaction would imply intent. Now, they would have made an intentional decision not to act on it. There you go. This whistleblower's having a good run. Then sent a copy to every member of the BBC board. They're doing it in a way which is removing the ability of the system to turn around and say, we didn't know anything about it, which is like one of the standard excuses given by organisations that are engaged in practices that are either corrupt or evil in some way. Now, Boris Johnson coming out in support of Trump in this regard, it's a bit of a head scratcher. I don't think there's a lot of love lost between Boris Johnson and President Trump at the moment. But setting aside who the misrepresentation was about, so let's ignore the fact it was Trump. Just the fact it was carried out in the way it was carried out is a concern about trust and impartiality and all those sort of bits and pieces. The fact it was then Trump just amplifies the concerns that people have about how reliable and ideologies and stuff. So it's I mean, Britain's national broadcaster using flagship program to tell palpable untruths about Britain's closest ally. Yeah. The Reform leader, Nigel Farage, saying no wonder it's fewer people are paying the BBC licence. Boris Johnson one is interesting. The fact he's got basically the colours of the Ukrainian flag behind him. We're going to talk about some Ukrainian stuff today as well. Given the allegations about how much he was responsible for the failure of the 2022 peace talks and fundamentally all the mess that's followed thereafter, I don't know how he's going to distance himself from that in the future. All right, so back to this. Former BBC presenter. Ooh, this is no surprise to me. Presented news and current affairs programs on the BBC on 4 stations from 93 to 2011. So we're talking Bush, the first part of Obama, 93. So that's also Clinton as well. That's just US presidencies. You're also talking the breakup of Yugoslavia. You're talking 93 93. So that was after Somalia, I believe. But in terms of, you got 2011. You had bombings in Libya before that. You obviously had the 2003 Iraq invasion. 91 was invasion, Gulf War One, but certainly no fly zones. You also had the Intifadas. You've had a lot of things happening over that time period where for the BBC to come out and say, this is the way it is. Everyone goes, g'day. G'day, Astral. I don't think I did raid you. That's a surprise. No, I haven't initiated a raid. Huh. When was that? Unless, the last raid I did, I remember someone saying, must have been talking in chat, saying that they were streaming something at the time. And so basically, as I was finishing my stream, it's like, well, hey, this person in chat said they were streaming at the time, and rated out that way. If I did that for you, I couldn't explain how the system let me do it if you didn't stream. But I'm pretty sure I rated somebody who was streaming last time. Huh. Anyway, that's interesting. That is really interesting. It's Twitch being Twitch, I guess. Anyway, back to this. So yeah, the biased groupthink amongst 22 days ago. I can't remember what happened 2 days ago. 22 days ago, yeah. I'd have to have a quick look. It's not showing in my activity feed. I know you followed me 22 days ago. Don't know. Good question. I'll take the credit for it, though. Yeah, okay. So groupthink amongst journalists is outrageous and had to be fought and rebalanced every day. Well, yeah. And this goes into the arguments about the bias at places like New York Times and Washington Post and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, well, you've got... Well, some of those don't even pretend to be impartial. Yeah, so, Astral, it must have been... You must have mentioned something in stream that day that gave me the impression you were streaming. My mistake. But, yeah, no, it was a surprise that it let me do it if you weren't streaming. Right. At a time when trust in politics and mainstream media is so low, the state broadcaster has additional responsibility to ensure it reports contentious and potentially inflammatory issues with a straight bat, i.e. take a neutral point of view. Yeah. The revelation that the BBC effectively faked a Trump speech is likely to have serious repercussions for the corporation's already strained relationship with the White House, i.e. your fake news. No, I don't play Halo. Although I did see Halo's getting a release on the PlayStation 5. No, but I don't play Halo at the moment. The Royal Charter comes up for a review. And they've added foreboding music. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, the article's already just covered this. They spliced together 3 separate parts of the speech in what appeared to be one fluent sentence. And they're talking about it from at least an hour apart in the thing. So what Mr. Trump said was, we're going to walk down and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down one you want, but I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Then, close to an hour later, he says, most people would stand there at 9 o'clock in the evening and say, I want to thank you very much about voting, and they go off to some other life. But something's wrong here, something's really wrong, can't happen, etc. We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. That, yeah, they're very much different things that he's talking about. And it's being, yeah, it's, yeah, I mean, they have issues. I mean, footage of the former monarch was edited to make look like she was storming off a photo shoot, which she didn't, led to the resignation of the controller of BBC One, so like the person who looks after them, looks over them, and so it had previously been covered. This is like the sort of reports you see from time to time on Australia seems to get them all the time. Military behaviour, inappropriate behaviour in the military, for example. In the space of 20 years, there's maybe been like a royal commission or report every 2 to 3 years talking about failures of leadership, failures of inappropriate behaviours, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, either the things aren't being fixed or there's more fundamental problems if there's constantly these sort of things appearing. What this is potentially suggesting here, leading into here, is that there are systemic issues within the BBC that's causing this. It could be potentially that the whistleblower is just dealing with a one-off set of incidents, but to have these other examples being brought forward from within the last few years is what makes people start to think that there actually is a systemic issue. And then if there is going to be investigations by government or commissions or whatever, then their role should be to find out, are those issues systemic or these one-offs? And this comes back to my theory of error making. If you've got these persistent errors appearing, it's an organisational, it's a systemic issue. It becomes one of negligence for those who have the authority and the power to change that culture and to change that management style and everything else. That you've come into a system, or you've taken control over a system that you know, so you're not ignorant of it, you know has its failings because it's been investigated and publicly made aware for many years, that you then have the ability to direct change into and therefore train people to do the right thing. So that takes away the incompetency defense and leaves you with the idea that by doing nothing, or the ineffectual changes you're making, is because you've got no desire to fix it. Now, it could also go back to incompetence, the Peter principle of people being promoted beyond levels of their competency. That happens a lot in organisations too. Why attribute malice when incompetency is the far more likely answer? I.e., why go to negligence when incompetency is far more likely to be the case? In this case, possible. And that's where these deeper investigations need to find out. And of course it comes down to liability as well. All right. Blah, 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 blah. So they're talking about previous stuff. Funnily enough, it was aired October last year, but no one really paid attention, or no one stood out in their complaints about it. One of the independent editorial advisors sitting on the Editorial Guideline and Standards Committee watched the program and was struck by its distinctly anti-Trump stance, with 10 critics versus just one supporter, and was then shocked there was no similar program examining the record of Kamala Harris. Fair enough. Now, we go back to one of the comments made previously when we were looking at the Kamala Harris interview about why Harris didn't appear on the same sort of podcasts or was seen as receiving the same sort of treatment in the lead up to the election 2024. In part, it was because of the demands she and her campaign put on the podcast when Trump was just like, yeah, I'll turn up and talk. And the podcasts were like, well, we're not going to change the way we do things. And as a result, she didn't go on them. So in some cases, it's by action of the party themselves, and other times it's, well, an unwillingness of the media to actually latch onto things. Now, we saw how the ABC got treated for daring to question Harris on things. We've seen the US 60 Minutes program be forced to pay out because they deceptively edited an interview. It's time to see what the BBC is going to have happen to it. Now, again, the fact it has to do with January 6, 2021 and everything else and Trump is just icing on the cake, really. The fundamental error underneath it all is bad enough. It's just that the subject of it is it's, well, incredible, to say the least. I mean, there's words for it, but I can't find the words for it right now. The footage included audio recording of a police dispatcher warning of 300 Proud Boys heading towards the seat of US government when, despite other BBC media showing, which came from even February 2021, showing that they were heading for the Capitol even before Trump had started speaking. The fact that Trump did not explicitly exhort supporters to go down and fight at Capitol Hill was one of the reasons there were no federal charges for incitement. Yeah, despite what the screaming of the media and politicians said at the time, and this is where fake news and allegations and slander and slurs and smears all come into it, because it was clear that what was being said that he'd said wasn't what he'd actually said or done. Yeah. Even the footage was an hour before the speech. It's misleading and but IDs who produced and directed it and edited it. So yeah. If BBC journalists are allowed to edit video in order to make people say things they never actually said, then what value are the corporation's guidelines? Why should the BBC be trusted? And where will it all end? It refused to accept a breach of standards and double down on defensive panorama. They're digging a hole much deeper for themselves. Asked, and to go back to the question of why there wasn't a comparison with Kamala Harris, it was not necessary for due impartiality to have companion programs. Well, I agree with that. There's no obligation to do a presentation or include Kamala Harris. I mean, you can do an article on Trump, not a problem. But don't misrepresent the truth. Person tried to justify the doctored video and mangled timeline of the day by citing a Democrat-packed congressional committee that concluded Mr. Trump was involved in a conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election. Right, so they're justifying it because Trump said 2020 was stolen. Now, fundamentally, legally, Biden was established as the president from 2021. Yep, done. The legality or the corruption in the election of November 2020, separate issue. Okay, so the fact that Congress looked at the results of the election and went, yeah, no, we believe that. At that point, they've legalized it. They've endorsed, like that was the whole January 6th thing of what Congress was supposed to do that day, was basically to validate, to endorse the outcome of the election and therefore appoint who was then going to be the next president. And, well, if you look at a whole bunch of the statistics out of 2024 and then put them up against the statistics from 2012, 2016, 2020, it is clear that there are some significant aberrations in the 2020 election, and that people who questioned that were often deplatformed or otherwise had their voice suppressed. And there still is a lot of hard feeling out there about what took place in the surrounds of the 2020 election. Does Trump have a point? Well, he does. He may not be eloquently putting it forward. But at the end of the day, the process that was then followed established Biden as the 46th president. Okay. Was the information used to establish that misleading or false? Quite possibly. And there was obviously, again, there's plenty of stuff coming out, and selective enforcement. This comes back to this idea of selective reportings, of lack of impartiality, and everything else. If they've been so egregious in making these errors on something that there was very well documented, how much do we trust them when they say that, oh no, 2020's election was carried out without error and that it's just Trump chasing conspiracy theories? Ask any Liverpool supporter what they think of the UK media and the government after Hillborough, and how much they misled the public on what took place. And that was just football fans. Yeah. Anyway, back to this. Yeah, dangerous precedents. Blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I mean, the comments don't show. I guess it's a little bit to do with... Anyway, that is the big article. Then they put out at the same time 2 companion articles, which is the broadcaster should brace itself for the US president's retaliation. Oh yeah, I can't see Trump taking this lying down. He's not going to be quiet about this. So we're going to hear lots of this in the next few days. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of this. Yeah, so if Trump's recent tangles with the media are anything to go by, the president will already be plotting his retaliation on the BBC for doctoring footage of his speech in January 6, 2021. The president has famously become more aggressive towards what he called the fake news media during his second term, well, because he's not getting elected again. He's not running again. He doesn't care as much. I mean, that's the thing. US presidents in their second term tend to be a little bit more freer in what they do and a bit more relaxed in what they do, because they're not needing to seek re-election. So they can take decisions and positions that might be a little bit more unpopular, but were what they'd always wanted to do since day one. Members of the press across him have been stripped of White House access or sued. Okay. The way that's put forward is a little bit of a stretch, but yeah, okay, we'll go with it. Yep, so this is giving a rundown on the article we just talked about. Okay, as I said previously, CBS found itself under being being sued for selective editing of their 60 Minutes interview with Harris. So the fact the BBC has done very much the similar sort of thing. So yeah, it claimed that CBS had attempted to sway the presidential election and launched legal action, and they've settled. And people say that this is the reason why Colbert is not being renewed, despite the fact he's not earning money. Considered devastating for CBS and an embarrassing fall from grace, the 60 Minutes once considered the gold standard of TV journalism. 60 Minutes have been caught out doing naughty things in the past too, but not often. Okay, talking about CBS, whatever, blah, 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 blah. There are many similarities between the CBS and BBC cases that will leave the corporation's executives waiting with bated breath for the president's next move. Big difference. The BBC is a national broadcaster. It's a public broadcaster. So you're not going to... You might sue them. Yeah, okay, that might go ahead. But you're not going to get the same sort of outcomes. Well, one, because they're not American. And two, they're a public broadcaster, so have different legislative protections, etc. Blah, 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 blah. Both cases appear to be about selective editing in a way that seemingly damages the president or helps his opponents. Both broadcasts took place within days of each other shortly before the presidential election. Oh, that's going to go even further. Now, several years back, around the time of Trump's first presidency, there was a list of journalists exposed, like a mailing list that they're all on, or like group chats, etc. And it was discovered that they were using this to coordinate viewpoints that were then going to be presented in articles that they wrote. And these were journalists from all over the world, I believe, certainly from a variety of major news organizations. And they called the list Journ-O list. Well, they're not paid to think very well. And it was shown, or it was alleged, that this was basically destroying the faith of impartiality of reporting and truthfulness in reporting, because you could clearly see people were shaping narratives, choosing what to cover, how to cover, what they were then asked to cover, and coordinating narratives that were then to be used. Now, to suggest that this doesn't exist anymore, I've got a bridge to sell you if that's the case. The fact that CBS is the BBC's US partner, even though they're editorially independent, is unlikely to help. The BBC's blunder, does seem a lot more serious. And the fact that their senior BBC figures ignored alerts, ignored being warned about it. It's, I can't, so talking about a whole bunch of other bits and pieces. He could ban the Trump could ban the BBC from the Oval Office and White House events, as he did with the AP when it refused to bow to pressure to rename the Gulf of America. BBC's going to get dumped. They're not going to have access to the press pool. I can definitely see that. The other article that they put out, 9 ways the BBC misled viewers over Trump. Now, this guy's obviously written a whole bunch of the articles. These came out yesterday afternoon. It's only like early morning our time, my time. This is still filtering its way through the system. Yep. Okay. So the author of the letter sent to the BBC board members highlights 9 other alleged examples in which the corporation displayed anti-Trump bias. So, okay, this is more detail from the whistleblowing letter. They include amplifying a rogue poll that favoured Kamala Harris, giving excessive coverage to Mr. Trump's comments about people eating pets, and dwelling too much on Harris's campaign issues while failing to grasp issues that appealed to Trump's supporters. Bias, straight up, people kind of expect it. And see, this is the thing. I think this is one of the reasons why the broad mandate he got out of 2024 election shocked so many people, is because people had been paid attention or voted for him back in 2016 and again in 2020, was probably already well aware of how much the media hated him. And therefore anything that the media presented as negative, which was 98% of coverage, was more than likely heavily slanted away from the truth in some way or form. And so they disregarded the media as irrelevant. And so the fact the media engaged in these heavily slanted coverage, to the people that voted for him, it was irrelevant. They'd given up on media a long time ago. If anything, it reduced the relative importance of what they were and what they represented. And I don't think there are that many swing voters left by that point. Now, you'd certainly hear people repeating the talking points of the media. They're the sort of people who, well, engage very vocally in aggressive discussion, but it's just, yeah. All right. The letter, one of the most misrepresented comments of the presidential campaign was made by Mr. Trump about Liz Cheney. Mr. Trump said Miss Cheney had always wanted to go war with people, describing her as a radical war hawk. Well, she is kind of a war hawk. He said, let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her face. Okay, let's see how she feels about it. He then attacked politicians sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. Okay, well, I mean, there's rhetoric there, and it's clearly a criticism of politicians who send troops to war without thinking about the cost. Yep, I mean, that's reasonable. However, the Harris campaign, chose to misrepresent it, had claimed that Trump had advocated shooting Miss Cheney, and the BBC repeatedly pushed this inaccurate version of what Trump had said. BBC News presenters and reporters said Mr. Trump wants people to shoot Liz Cheney in the face, and that Liz Cheney should face a firing squad. The BBC's North American editor said Mr. Trump had been ratcheting up the violent rhetoric and suggested one of his political opponents should face guns, have them train on her face. So, yeah, compiled additional items. And that, well, they gave undue weight to single polls. They gave excess coverage to rogue polls. Not very good polls. And polls that contradicted, well, was probably better weighted, were underplayed and focused too heavily on campaign issues promoted by Kamala Harris at the expense of giving greater weight to the economy, migration, employment, which proved to be a significant factor in how people voted. Go back to what I just said. The people voting for Trump had given up on media a long time ago. They already disbelieved what was being put to them as being little more than partisan talking points of a specific ideology, i.e. US Democratic talking points, or the left. People already saw it like that. It is that broader breakdown of the impartiality and trust that they believe they still have. Well, quite clearly the election results show that has been lost. Now, the rest of the population still swallows it uncritically. Probably doesn't want to hear a more balanced viewpoint. They should, but they don't want to hear it. And so it's almost They're being hoist on their own petard, really. They're being Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And this is something that a lot of Trump supporters were talking about, and in the face of often very heated rhetoric coming in the other direction. But the 2024 convictions for falsifying records often failed to highlight that many US prosecutors are political appointees, which meant viewers did not have a good understanding of the so-called lawfare at play during the election campaign. Or the fact we talked about an article about 20 minutes ago of somebody who had received a pardon for actions in 2021, yet the prosecutors of their ongoing court case tried to include that in the sentencing guidelines. And then they got all upset when they were removed from the case. Well, yeah, it's... And the whole stuff with, like, Letitia James and Jack Smith, prosecutor, judge, the two of them. I know one of them in Gorgon, and I forget the name of the other one, but basically Southern District of New York. And the idea that, oh no, this is politically driven, or even a lot of the injunctions that are being sought on Trump's actions and stuff at the moment are largely driven by, well, Democrats venue shopping to find a compliant judge. So the idea that a judge in the Northern California circuit can issue an injunction that applies federally doesn't make sense from a common sense viewpoint. And the fact that it's then often overturned at the Supreme Court or on appeal suggests that lends credence to the idea that the initial injunction was little more than a political stunt. And, well, we've been through a process where a whole chunk of the population no longer trusts the media anymore. They're now running through a process where a whole chunk of the population's not going to trust the judicial system. People are digging holes that they're not going to see the consequences of for a while. Okay, I've mixed my metaphors. Yeah, they're taking actions they're not going to see consequences for or outcomes from for a very long time. Overemphasizing certain events, using contested language such as reproductive rights without attributing the phrases to the campaigners that promoted them, which signaled a biased mindset to viewers, particularly those in America. Now, I get that. You want to use, where possible, you want to use neutral terms so as not to lend support to one side of an argument or another when you're just trying to report neutrally. I would have thought that the term reproductive rights is fairly neutral. I don't know what the alternate phraseology that is promoted or turned down is. It's fairly straightforward. I mean, reproductive rights make sense. You tell me that, and I'm like, okay, I've got a fair idea of what you're talking about. I don't know how that appears a contested term, but language changes. We've seen that over years, that certain terminology falls out of favour in common use, that some language is what is seen as accepted in one time period is then later seen as racist or ableist or all sorts of ists. There are terms used in common use now that people don't understand. Once were very offensive terms that had initially started out as medical terms used to describe people lacking certain capacities and capabilities. Yet they've passed through that period of offence into general usage and have lost their impact. Yet there are other terms in use now that well, one day may pass through the same pattern. Yeah. Just trying to think. There's a good example of that, of terminology changing over years. Anyway, a tendency to frame issues in a way that's similar to the Harris campaign, and there was less fact-checking of questionable statements. Contested language. Questionable statements. That's contested language, i.e. lies. Less fact-checking of the lies. Even fact-checking can be contested. Compared with those made by Trump. The use of aggregate economic and immigration data skewed coverage because it marked important class and regional variations which contributed to the election result. Yeah, I mean, flyover countries, etc. G'day, Third Stream. Not too bad, mate. Thank you for the anniversary note. Thank you. Not doing too badly. Yep. Balance of more in-depth programs was markedly anti-Trump, pro-Harris. Again, you're looking at the first article by the Telegraph today says that it took a hit at the BBC's impartiality. Well, clearly they weren't being impartial. The internal review couldn't find a single program that looked more critically at Harris and her record than Trump. Well, okay, there's a reason for that. It wasn't just the BBC. No one did that, or no one was allowed to do that, at least not outside what you'd regard as splinter media or niche media. Harris's campaign and her supporters were very adept at shutting down criticism. Well, they weren't adept at it. They just created noise until people left it alone. Or they pushed pressure buttons to make people walk away from things. So, from what I witnessed, I fear the problems could be even more widespread than this summary might suggest. Now, this is the third article. That first article had it pretty bad, covered it pretty bad. This talked about the other elements from that whistleblowers report that are missing. Oh, yeah. I don't see, though. All right. I see there being systemic issues within the BBC based on this report. Just based on experience of government agencies and bodies and things like that. They'll have a degree of corruption and waste and inefficiency and groupthink and all these other bits and pieces. So the fact that this exists shouldn't be a surprise. The level to which it exists is the surprise. The fact it is allowed to fester to a point that the nominal impartiality of the organisation is under threat. Yeah, okay, that's the bit that's a little bit more surprising. I don't see the current UK government having the courage to take on the BBC fully. Because, well, that would mean cutting out the legs of one of their main one of the main media organisations that support them, or at least is somewhat ideologically aligned, and there may be a commission or something like that. But the question is, will it have teeth? Under the current government, I don't think so. Now, I'll temper that observation or that assessment with how salacious these claims are and the potential for damage. Well, it has damaged the BBC's reputation. The potential for global effect, let alone what Trump's going to do in response. But the UK government may then have their hand forced on this matter and actually do something with some teeth in order to rehabilitate reputation. to say, look, no, we've reined in the worst of the excesses. We've investigated them and we're taking care of, we're following the outcomes and everything else. Please trust us. That could be the outcome, even if they don't want to do it from a political or an ideological perspective. They're being forced to do it because of what's happening here. So, yeah, that one's going to be fun. Now, keep that in mind about the willingness of seemingly impartial and trustworthy organisations to tell you lies with a straight face.